Vietnamese mossy frogs are one of the coolest frogs on the planet, but do they make good pets? Me and Mango here are going to answer that question as well as tell you everything you need to know so that you can care for your Vietnamese mossy frog. So Mango here is a Vietnamese mossy frog. As the name suggests, they look like a patch of moss, which is a type of camouflage for them. It's really cool to see them on a patch of moss because then you really get a sense of that camouflage and how well it works. Also, as the name suggests, they do come from Vietnam. Mostly they live in like limestone cliffs and caves, stuff like that, but they do live near water and they are a semi-aquatic species. To start off, I'm going to talk about availability, where you can get these guys. Now, mossy frogs are a fairly uncommon species to come across, but there are a number of places that you can get them from. However, they're not going to be as common as something like a White's tree frog or even red-eyed tree frogs. With them being on the rarer side, they can be a bit pricey. I've seen some sell for up to $150. I got mine for $40 each. I got a pair of them from somebody that couldn't take care of them anymore. And in my opinion, that's the best way to get an animal because you're giving an animal that needs a new home a home. If you can provide a good, caring home for them, go and do it. It's the best way. So if you want to get your hands on some Vietnamese mossy frogs, you can definitely do it. However, you might have to do a bit of searching. So how big do Vietnamese mossy frogs get? Well, the males can grow up to 2.5 inches with the females being 3.5 inches. It's pretty typical with frogs that the females are about an inch larger. You're going to see that with pretty much any species. I'm not sure about dart frogs, but most tree frogs, males are always smaller. Also take note that females are a lot harder to find. Mossy frogs lay clutches of 8 to 10 eggs and a ratio of about 1 to 4 of those being female. Telling the difference between a Vietnamese mossy frog for male and female is fairly simple. A lot of frogs it can be difficult and the only really telltale sign is size. But with mossy frogs it's not only size, but the males will have little small kind of reddish pink pads, bulges on their thumb, right under their thumb. So that's a way that you can tell if your mossy frog is a male or female. Now in terms of lifespan, mossy frogs you can at least expect 10 years. However, with proper care they can live 12 to 15. They are a commitment, but they are a pretty manageable size. The next thing I'll talk about is level of care. Now this is something that I think is pretty important in terms of mossy frogs, is that they are not a beginner frog species. I would only keep mossy frogs if you either have done a lot of research. I put in 2+ hours of research into any animal I get for the first time, even something as simple as a crested gecko, but do your research, or if you've kept amphibians before, because there are a few aspects of these guys that can be difficult to take care of, most of which I'll get into later. Now we'll get into some of the basics. Temperature and humidity, two of the most basic things with any animal's care. So mossy frogs actually have a pretty high range of temperature and humidity, with their temperature ranging from 65 to 80 degrees. However, they do live in cooler environments, so I wouldn't recommend going any higher than 80. As with most animals, a temperature gradient is always a good idea. Have one side warmer than the other, have one side cold. You shouldn't need any type of heating with these guys. If you can keep their temperature around, I'd say 73, you're probably okay. However, if you find yourself, like me, in a colder room, something like an under-tank heater attached to the side of the tank might be your best option. I have one on mine and it keeps the hotter side about 72 to 75 and the cooler side about 68 to 72. Adding a heating pad on the side of your tank is a great way to maintain temperatures as well as create a natural left to right gradient. In terms of humidity, it's pretty simple. It's the same type of thing. They have a pretty high range, ranging from 70% to 100%. If you have issues keeping humidity up, there's a few things you can do to fix that, and I'll talk about those later in the video. Next thing is lighting. Now mossy frogs, one of my favorite things about most tree frog species is they don't need any special lighting, no special UVB or anything like that. However, it is important that you give them a consistent day-night cycle with about 12 hours during the day, 12 hours at night. I have mine on that timer. Timer's the best way to keep that so you're not waking up late or going to bed or whatever, just so that you get a consistent day and night cycle. So just a basic LED light, or if you have plants in your tank, you could do a plant growing light. That's what I have. I'm not sure exactly what specifics about the lights there are, but I just get aquarium lights for mine, and the plants grow well, frogs are fine. That seems to work for me. It also provides a little bit of additional heat, which is always a plus. So as I said, these guys are super simple when it comes to lighting, and they don't need much at all. Just a simple LED or plant growing light, and you'll be good to go. Now I'll talk about enclosure. Now with mossy frogs, they are semi-aquatic frogs, so providing them with water, a land area, and plenty of height is a must. They are also a type of tree frog. They're also referred to as the Vietnamese mossy tree frog. So providing water, a land area, and lots of branches and height to climb on is very, very important. I would recommend about 10 gallons at least per frog. However, bigger is always better. I keep 2 of mine in a 40-gallon breeder that I converted into a vertical paludarium. I have a video about that if you want to go watch that and get some ideas. So like I said earlier, if you have problems keeping humidity up, there are a few things you can do. The first option is adding sphagnum moss in places, like in between rocks, wood, wherever you might have plants. Adding sphagnum moss is a very good way to keep humidity up. You can also top that with moss that will help with additional humidity. The second option is plants. Having live plants in your enclosure is not only very good for the frogs as it gives them a more natural habitat, but it also keeps the humidity up and filters the air and water. So plants are very beneficial and a great way to keep up humidity. Now keep in mind that your water feature will also be contributing to most, if not all, of the humidity in your tank. Now it is towards the bottom of the tank, so at the top is where you might find problems keeping the humidity up. Things you can do for that is to cover the top of your enclosure. If you're I use a 40-gallon tank, so the top of mine was already closed off. I just added a little ventilation piece at the top. But if you're using something like an Exoterra, using a piece of polycarbonate or glass to cover the top of that will really help keep the humidity up. However, make sure that you do not use acrylic. I made this mistake when making the lid, and acrylic warps under humidity. So if you use that, you'll have problems with it. So glass or polycarbonate, perfect option. Now, in terms of water quality, as with most aquatic or semi-aquatic animals, you are going to need a filter. I have a submersible filter on mine because I have a drip wall feature, but any sort of just internal filter like that will work fine. Also, as with every animal, every amphibian, this is very important that you use either reverse osmosis or dechlorinated water. Chlorine is very harmful to frogs and can cause a whole lot of issues, even death. So make sure that you buy some kind of dechlorinator or use filtered water. I would also recommend adding something like Indian almond leaves, as they are rich in tannins. Those will help to lower the pH of the water, which again you'll find in their natural habitat. Mossy frog feeding is one of the hardest aspects of keeping these frogs, but not in the way you might think. Feeding them themselves is actually super easy. They eat well and stuff like that. It's cleaning up after them. Mossy frogs eat insects like crickets and other similar sized insects like roaches, and having a semi-aquatic environment means that these bugs can end up in the water and drown, which is what happens with my tank all the time. And if it's not dealt with right away, it gets really, really, really bad. So I would recommend daily cleaning up just any, extra crickets or bugs that end up in the water. Get them out as soon as possible. You could probably wait 2 to 3 days, like if you're on vacation or if you're not home or whatever like that, and it should be fine. It might be a little messier to clean up. I won't go too much into detail because it is pretty gross, but I would recommend cleaning that every day. And that's one of the aspects of these frogs. A lot of frogs, you're not going to have to clean up their tanks every day, but with these frogs, you do. Now, you could feed your frogs by hand. If you can get them to eat by hand, great. I would prefer doing it that way. However, mine will not eat by hand. I've tried multiple times and I've had no luck, no success. I've tried to get them to eat crickets, roaches, earthworms, stuff like that, and they won't have it. So if you can get your frogs to eat by hand, that would minimize the mess a lot and make these guys a lot easier to care for. Another option is to just put the crickets in a container, but the problems with that is a lot of times crickets will jump out of that, or the frogs might have a hard time getting in there. Now for how many and how often to feed mossy frogs. Mossy frogs eat about 2 to 3 crickets every night, or 4 to 6 every other night. Just keep adding on 2 to 3 for every night in between feedings. I feed mine 4 to 6 every other night just because I don't want to feed them every night and it's easier for me. You could also, like if you're going on vacation for a week, you can do the math, add it up, and then just put the crickets in there ahead of time. Like I said, mine do hunt by themselves, and I think a lot of them do, so that might be your best method instead of, getting a pet sitter to feed them or anything. The good thing is if you do go on vacation and you feed them the crickets beforehand, that's basically all the care they need. As long as you're keeping humidity up consistently and temperature, you should be fine. I would recommend feeding them before or after the lights turn off because that's when they become active at night. Also make sure that you are dusting them with a calcium powder. Now this is a topic that I feel is, I don't know if I want to say controversial in the keeping of exotic pets and reptiles, but I would say it's really difficult to find a solid answer. I was searching for hours and I couldn't find anything that was a definitive answer on what you should be dusting the crickets with for these guys. I read that you're supposed to dust them with a low D3 calcium powder, but I searched everywhere and I couldn't find anything. So I just feed them a no D3 calcium powder. I think it's the brand I have. It's either Zoomed or Exoterra. You can find it at Petco pretty much anywhere. And that topic also varies from keeper to keeper. Some will recommend different supplements and, you know, different calcium powders and whatnot, but I've been using that stuff for about 6 months now and it seemed to work fine. Mossy frogs' personalities are pretty cool. They're a nocturnal species, like I said earlier, so they only come out at night, but if you catch them out at night, they're hunting, swimming around, their calls are super, super cute. I would recommend looking up a video of that if you want to hear what these guys sound like. A lot of frogs have a very annoying call, such as White's tree frogs might be one of the most annoying calls from a frog. African or American bullfrogs are also pretty annoying. So this brings me to another aspect of mossy frogs that can be very hard to care for and is one of the biggest downsides for these guys. Male mossy frogs will try to breed with each other. Obviously this isn't possible, and some people have even had theirs drown each other. I've had mine do it a few times. They've tried with each other recently. It's gotten worse. That's mostly because I think it's starting to get into breeding season, so they're kind of a little more, you know, they feel they need to do that more. I've watched them though, they've seemed to work it out themselves, so far I've had no issues. And if you watch yours and observe them and you've had no issues for, months or years, then you're probably fine. Again, just, maybe keep an eye on them and make sure that they can work it out themselves. But that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing you can do to prevent this is make their water area more shallow. However, they are, like I said, a semi-aquatic species, so they do prefer waters that are a little bit deeper. I'd say 5 to 6 inches. I have mine about 7. But that's, another option. You can maybe get away with 3 or 4. Do mossy frogs like to be handled? Well, the simple answer to that is absolutely not. They hate being handled. I am very surprised that he has been this good throughout this whole video. Normally I get him out and he's jumped everywhere like that. They jump and tend to just like that. Of course, as I'm talking about it, he jumps. Occasional handling won't hurt, like if you have to clean their enclosure, something like that's completely fine, but I wouldn't recommend handling them for long periods of time. I also wouldn't recommend just handling them on like a consistent daily basis or something. If you're going to handle them for a long time, I would use gloves, and maybe just gloves all the time, because our skin has oils that can transfer to them, especially if after you've used soap or any other chemicals or stuff, it can really, really harm them. So keep that in mind. So as you can see here, he jumped to his wood. I kind of got this out because I tested it the other day and he seemed to like this better. If you're looking for a frog that you want to handle, mossy frogs are not the frog for you. Something like a White's tree frog is a much better option. Also, mossy frogs do pee on you and they have pretty good aim, so be careful about that. They have tried to pee on me before. Luckily, I haven't had it in my face or anything or on me, but they do pee. Also, they have been known to play dead. I've never had that happen with mine, but they'll curl up into a ball and play dead, so just keep that in mind so you don't think that your mossy frog just died out of nowhere. Last thing I'll talk about is breeding. Now, I don't know a whole lot in this topic. There's much more people that are more experienced on that, or articles you can read. But mossy frogs breed in rock cavities where the ground has been flooded with water. They'll breed and then they'll lay 8 to 10 eggs right above the water line. If you're into breeding these guys, I would do a little more research on that, because again, I'm not super familiar with a lot of stuff like that. So do mossy frogs make good pets, and are they hard to care for? Well, in my opinion, mossy frogs make amazing pets for anybody who loves amphibians and frogs. They're entertaining to watch if you can catch them at night, and not to mention, they look awesome. Once you get your enclosure set up and establish a feeding system, they're relatively easy to care for. Like I said, I wouldn't recommend them for beginners though, because they do have a few aspects that are fairly hard to care for. But if you have experience with frogs and want to keep Vietnamese mossy frogs, go for it. You won't regret it. They're one of my all-time favorite frog species, if not my all-time favorite frog species. I only discovered them as soon as I got them, and I've fallen in love with them since. Their looks and behaviors are so unique to observe, and they're just overall an amazing species. Anyways, I think that covers everything that you need to know so that you can get your Vietnamese mossy frogs. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope that you found this guide helpful. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask me down in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. See ya!